By the time the early 1980s rolled around, Japan had entered what can only be described as automotive puberty. The nation's carmakers, who had spent the previous 2 decades building practical boxes for people who cared more about the economy than excitement, suddenly discovered horsepower, turbos, and ego. This was an era where engineers were given more caffeine than sleep and were told to build cars that could embarrass Europe's best while costing half as much. And from that glorious laboratory of madness came one of the most important yet criminally underappreciated performance icons of the decade, the Nissan Skyline 2000 Turbo RSX. Now, you've probably heard of the Skyline. You might even be picturing one right now. The R34 perhaps, with its computer-assisted lunacy, or the boxy R32 GTR that terrified Porsche owners and made the phrase Godzilla a permanent part of the motoring vocabulary. But before all of that, before the RB26 and ATESA systems, there was this, a square-edged, grille-less, turbocharged brute that looked like a Soviet officer's briefcase and went like a missile. So, when the R30 generation Skyline arrived in 1981, Nissan was in a bind. The once great Skyline nameplate had drifted into mediocrity during the emissions-choked 1970s. The all-straight 6 engines, while smooth, were too thirsty for a world of oil crises and tightening regulations. Nissan needed something new, something that could revive the Skyline's racing soul without guzzling fuel like a thirsty sumo wrestler. Enter the FJ20 engine, a 1990cc inline 4 that was quite frankly an engineering masterpiece for its time. It had double overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, and an appetite for revs that made most European 4-bangers seem positively agricultural. This was Japan's first mass-produced 4-valve per cylinder engine. Initially, this naturally aspirated engine made its debut in the Nissan Skyline 2000 RS, where it produced a respectable 150 horsepower, plenty for 1981. But engineers being engineers weren't satisfied. They wanted more power, more torque, and ideally more things to stick the word turbo on. By 1983, they had their answer, the FJ20ET, a turbocharged version of the same engine, now belting out 190 horsepower, and later in the intercooler equipped RSX Turbo C trim about 205. That made the DR30 the most powerful production car in Japan at the time. This wasn't just a good Skyline, it was a declaration that Japan could make performance cars to rival anything from Munich or Turin. Now, the first R30 Skylines were decent looking cars, but not particularly memorable. Then in 1983, Nissan decided to give the performance variants a facelift. The result was one of the most distinctive faces in Japanese automotive history, and it was called the Iron Mask. The idea was simple, but bold. Remove the grille entirely and give the car a flat, sheer front end with flush headlights. It looked less like a car and more like a wedge-shaped weapon. The design was so severe it could have been drawn with a set square and a hangover. But it worked. It gave the Skyline a personality, a sense of menace, and it made it instantly recognizable among a sea of boxy contemporaries. If you stood behind one, it wasn't much subtler either. There were spoilers and enough turbo decals to convince passing pedestrians that you were in command of something very fast indeed. Power, however, was only one part of the story, because unlike many Japanese cars of the time that were content to go fast in a straight line and then wobble around corners like a startled jelly, the DR30 actually handled well. It was built on a stiffened rear-wheel drive platform with independent suspension, and in top-spec RSX trim it was equipped with surprisingly advanced technology. We're talking anti-skid control, which was essentially an early form of ABS, and even cruise control, which in 1983 Japan was the kind of futuristic feature you'd expect to only see in a Bond film. And yet, from all of this sophistication, the DR30 remained refreshingly analog to drive. No electronic trickery, no computer intervention, just a turbocharged 4-cylinder and a manual gearbox that felt like it had been assembled by people who understood the meaning of joy. Then there was the marketing. You see, while most car ads of the time featured pleasant families and countryside backdrops, Nissan decided to do something rather different. They hired Paul Newman, yes, that Paul Newman, to star in their Japanese television commercials. Newman, who was already moonlighting as a racing driver, lent the Skyline an international air of cool that no amount of engineering alone could achieve. The ads were simple but effective. Paul Newman standing next to a Skyline, looking effortlessly suave. That was it. You didn't need explosions or gimmicks. If it was good enough for Butch Cassidy, it was good enough for anyone. The connection was so strong that Nissan even released a special edition named after him, the Skyline Paul Newman version. It was essentially a high-spec RS model with Newman's signature on the dash, but it worked brilliantly as marketing. But from a technical standpoint, the DR30 was a bridge between eras. It carried the last traces of the old-school rear-wheel drive performance philosophy, but paired them with a level of sophistication that pointed toward the high-tech Skylines to come. The FJ20ET engine was a marvel of precision, using an electronic fuel injection system developed in-house by Nissan. This was quite advanced for the time. It was built to take abuse, with a forged crankshaft and a robust iron block that could handle far more boost than stock. Tuners obviously quickly realized that this thing was almost indestructible, and many modified DR30s comfortably exceed 300 horsepower without so much as a cough. This made the DR30 a favorite among Japanese street racers, track day enthusiasts, and later collectors who understood just how significant this car really was. It was, after all, the car that set the stage for what came next, the RB series engines, and ultimately the R32 GTR that would change the world. But despite all this brilliance, the DR30 has spent much of its life overshadowed by its younger, more famous siblings. Everyone remembers the R32 GTR because it dominated Group A racing, the R34 because it became a digital superstar, but the DR30, it quietly went about its business, earning the respect of enthusiasts but rarely making headlines outside of Japan. Part of this was because it wasn't officially sold in many export markets. Most of the 400,000 R30s built were family models with modest engines, only a small fraction with a high-performance RS and RSX variants, and fewer still have survived the decades unscathed. The car's steel bodywork, like most Japanese metal of the era, was about as resistant to rust as a biscuit in a rainstorm. Yet for those lucky enough to find one today, the DR30 offers something truly special. It's a raw, analog, beautifully engineered piece of 1980s performance history that feels alive in your hands. And because it predates the electronics heavy GTRs, it's also refreshingly honest. You, the car, and the road. No filters, no algorithms. But to end this video off, in a world obsessed with R34s, Nürburgring times, and YouTube drag races, the DR30 sits quietly in the shadows, square-jawed and defiant. And maybe that's exactly how it should be, because while everyone else is busy chasing Godzilla, the Iron Mask is still out there, smiling that cold metallic smile, reminding us where the legend truly began. But yeah, at the end of this video, please let me know what you guys think of this car and its story. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you guys did like it, you must enjoy most of my other stuff. So just go through my channel, see if there's someone else I like, or check you guys in the next one. Cheers, eh?